Who hurt you? $40 short. That was the only number in my head when I felt the cold water soak through my knees. My hands still smelled like bleach and stale grease. My uniform, once yellow, was now stained dark with mud and something warmer, something metallic. Double shifts at the diner taught me how to turn off the pain. How to ignore the throbbing in my feet, the hunger cramping my stomach, the terrifying math of poverty that kept me awake every night. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I couldn't. Not when the rent was late, and the landlord had threatened to call Child Protective Services on my little sister again. Being tired is a luxury. Being hungry is just Tuesday. I tell stories of the invisible finding power. Tap subscribe so you don't miss the moment the tables turn. Now, let's go back to the rain. The storm was hammering the diner windows, drowning out the city, turning the neon open sign into a bleeding red blur on the pavement. 10 minutes. I just needed 10 minutes to wipe the last table, count the tips, and run for the last bus. 10 minutes before I could stop being a servant and just be a sister. 10 minutes before I could lock the world out. I kept my head down. That's the golden rule in this neighborhood. Be invisible. Be small. If you're nothing, they can't break you. I had $38 in my pocket, a keychain with a picture of my sister, and a worn-out pair of sneakers. Nothing worth dying for. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. I didn't hear them stand up until the air in the room changed. 3 men in booth 4. They hadn't ordered coffee. They hadn't looked at a menu. They were just waiting. The lock on the front door clicked. Click. In the silence of the empty diner, it sounded like a gunshot. I froze. Calculated. Kitchen door was 20 feet behind me. They were 10 feet in front. You worked the night shift last Tuesday. It wasn't a question. It was a statement from the man in the center. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like a man who hurt people for a living. His eyes were cold, flat, like a reptile watching a fly. I gripped the wet rag in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The boy, the man said, stepping over the spilled sugar packets on the floor. The boy who came in bleeding. We know you hit him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And now, you're going to tell us where he is. 2 a.m. usually sounded like silence, but tonight it sounded like drowning. The rain didn't just fall, it punished the city, hammering against the plate glass windows of the diner with a violence that made the neon open sign buzz and flicker. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale fryer grease, bleach, and the damp wool of my own cheap sweater. My spine felt like it had been fused into a permanent curve over the counter. I pressed the rag into a stubborn coffee ring on table 3, scrubbing until my knuckles turned white, but the stain, like everything else in my life, refused to move. I stopped, exhaling a breath that fogged the cold window, and pulled the wad of cash from my apron pocket. This was the ritual. The terrifying, midnight mathematics. I smoothed the crumpled bills onto the damp formica. Ones. A few fives. A single, torn 10. I counted them twice, then a third time, praying the numbers would change. They didn't. $180. Rent was due in 12 hours. I was $40 short. $40. It was a laughable amount to the suits who came in during the lunch rush, dropping that much on sandwiches they didn't finish. But for me, $40 was the difference between a roof and a shelter. It was the difference between keeping my 14-year-old sister, Nia, in her warm bed or watching her get swallowed by a foster system that chewed up girls like her and spat them out broken. I close my eyes, the image of Nia's sleeping face flashing in the dark behind my eyelids. She needed braces. She needed a winter coat that didn't have duct tape on the lining. Most of all, she needed me to not fail. I swept the money back into my pocket, the bills feeling heavy and useless against my hip. My uniform, once a cheerful buttery yellow, was now a map of old stains and exhaustion, fraying at the hem. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, hollow cheeks, eyes rimmed with red, hair frizzy from the humidity. I looked like a ghost haunting her own life. I grabbed the mop bucket, the wheels squeaking across the linoleum. Just finish the floor. Turn off the lights. Walk the 6 blocks home in the rain. Figure out which utility bill to skip to cover the rent. I moved toward the back booths, the mop sloshing grey water onto the tiles. I kept my head down, focused on the scuff marks, focused on the rhythm of the work, focused on anything but the panic rising in my throat. Then the air changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a shift in pressure, a sudden heaviness that made the hair on my arms stand up. I stopped moving. The diner was supposed to be empty. I had flipped the sign. I had locked the door. Hadn't I? I slowly lifted my head, the mop handle slick in my gripping hands. In the reflection of the rain-streaked window, I saw them. 3 shadows in booth 4, sitting in a silence that was louder than the storm outside. The man in the middle slid out of the booth. He was tall, wearing a coat that cost more than my life's earnings, but his eyes were dead things. He stepped over the wet floor, his boots making a heavy, rhythmic thud against the tile that echoed in the hollow of my chest. I said, "We're closed," I tried to say, but my voice was thin, trembling like a child's. "We know," he said, stopping just inside my personal space. He smelled of rain and cold tobacco. "We didn't come for food, Boosie." He knew my name. The mop handle slipped in my sweaty palms. "Last Tuesday," he continued, his voice terrifyingly conversational. "A boy came in here. Bleeding. Messy business. You put him somewhere while the police drove by." "Where?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. The kid, barely 20, clutching his side, eyes wide with the kind of terror that makes you do stupid, brave things. I had shoved him into the dry storage pantry behind the 50-pound flour sacks. I hadn't asked questions. I just couldn't watch him die. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, staring at the leader's chin because I couldn't bear to look him in the eye. "I serve 100 people a day. I don't remember faces." The leader didn't blink. He didn't shout. He just moved. His hand lashed out, backhanding me across the face with the speed of a striking snake. The force of it lifted me off my feet. I crashed into the counter, my hip checking the sharp metal edge before I crumpled to the floor. The pain was a white-hot explosion in my cheekbone. I tasted copper, blood, warm and metallic, pulling in my mouth. My glasses skittered across the linoleum, cracking against the table leg. "Wrong answer," he said, crouching down so his face was inches from mine. "That boy is a rat. He stole something from us. And you helped him." He grabbed a handful of my hair, yanking my head back until my neck screamed in protest. I stared up at the ceiling fan, dust spinning lazily in the dim light, tears springing to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer shock of the violence. "Please," I gasped, the word bubbling through the blood in my mouth. "I just work here. I have a sister. Please." "Then think about her," he hissed, twisting his grip tighter, pulling strands from my scalp. "Think about who's going to take care of her when you can't walk." "Where did he go?" I knew the answer. The boy had slipped out the back alley an hour later, leaving a thank you note scrawled on a napkin and a bloodstain I'd scrubbed with bleach until my hands burned. But looking at this man, at the casual cruelty etched into the lines of his face, I knew that telling him wouldn't save me. It would just make me an accessory to whatever they planned to do next. I locked my jaw, spitting a mouthful of blood onto his polished boot. I told you. I don't know. The leader sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. He released my hair, letting my head crack against the floor, and stood up. He nodded to the two men looming behind him like jagged mountains. Teach her, he said, turning his back as the first boot drew back, aiming for my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the crack of ribs, but the blow never landed. Instead, the world exploded. The massive plate glass window at the front of the diner shattered inward, a tsunami of tempered glass and rain spraying across the booths. The sound was deafening, a sharp, crystalline roar that swallowed the storm. The viper standing over me flinched, shielding his face, and in that split second of distraction, the atmosphere in the room shifted from predatory to terrified. A man stepped through the jagged empty frame. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked in out of the rain, stepping over the broken glass with a terrifying, fluid grace. He wore a dark leather jacket soaked through to the skin, his hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from a jaw set like granite. He looked less like a savior and more like a reaper who had lost his patience. "Who the hell are you?" the leader shouted, reaching for the pistol tucked into his waistband. The stranger didn't answer. He moved. It happened so fast my concussion-blurred brain couldn't track it. One moment he was by the door, the next, he was a blur of motion in the center of the room. He caught the first man's wrist, the one reaching for the gun, and I heard a wet, sickening snap. The scream was cut short as the stranger drove an elbow into the man's throat, dropping him like a sack of cement. The second man, the one who had been about to kick me, lunged forward. The stranger didn't even look at him. He ducked under a wild haymaker, pivoting on his heel to drive a boot into the attacker's kneecap. The sound was like a dry branch breaking. The man howled and collapsed, clutching a leg that bent the wrong way. The leader, the man who had torn my hair out, stumbled backward, his face draining of color. He recognized the stranger. I saw it in his eyes, the sudden, dawning horror of a man realizing he had just made a fatal mistake. "Sun Junquan," the leader whispered, his hands raising in a trembling surrender. "We didn't know." Junquan didn't let him finish. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbing the leader by the lapels of his expensive coat and hurling him through the air. The man crashed into the counter, taking the napkin dispenser and ketchup bottles down with him in a clatter of plastic and fear. Silence slammed back into the room, heavier than before. I tried to push myself up, but the floor tilted violently. The adrenaline that had kept me conscious was draining away, leaving only the throbbing agony in my head and the cold seepage of rain on my skin. The room spun, gray and black edges creeping into my vision. My arms gave out. I fell forward, expecting the hard slap of the tile. I didn't hit the floor. Strong, rough hands caught me, gripping my shoulders with a firmness that was shocking after the violence. I was hauled up, pulled against a chest that felt like a stone wall wrapped in wet leather. I could smell him, rain, ozone, and something sharp like gunpowder. I forced my swollen eyes open. The stranger, the monster who had dismantled 3 men in 10 seconds, was looking down at me. His eyes were dark, infinite, and terrifyingly calm. "You," I wheezed, my voice barely a sound. He didn't speak. He just scooped me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing, turning his back on the carnage he had created, carrying me out into the storm that was waiting to swallow us both. Waking up felt less like rising from sleep and more like resurfacing from deep, dark water. My body was heavy, a lead weight sinking into a mattress that swallowed me whole. I reached out instinctively, expecting the scratchy polyester of my thrift store blanket or the lumpy springs of the pull-out couch. Instead, my fingers grazed fabric so cool and smooth it felt like liquid silk. I forced my eyes open. The ceiling was high, shadowed, and edged with crown molding that likely cost more than my rent for a year. The air didn't smell like mildew or old fryer grease. It smelled of sandalwood, crisp linen, and the sharp, chemical bite of high-grade antiseptic. "Easy," a voice murmured. I flinched, trying to scramble backward, but my ribs protested with a hot spike of pain that stole my breath. A man in a charcoal vest was standing beside the bed, closing a leather medical bag. He wasn't wearing scrubs. He looked like the kind of doctor who didn't take insurance, the kind who made house calls for people who couldn't be seen in public emergency rooms. "You have a mild concussion and deep tissue bruising," he said, snapping a silver clasp shut with a finality that made me shiver. "Your cheekbone is fractured, but it's a hairline break. It will heal without surgery." "Where?" My voice was a rusted hinge. I coughed, tasting the ghost of blood. "Where am I?" "Who are you?" "You are a guest of Mr. Sun," the doctor replied, his tone professional but entirely detached. "I've administered a pain blocker. You should rest." "Mr. Sunday." The name meant nothing to me, but the room screamed everything I needed to know. I looked past the doctor, my vision finally sharpening. The far wall wasn't a wall at all. It was glass. I pushed the silk sheets aside, ignoring the doctor's sharp protest, and stumbled toward the window. My legs felt like jelly, trembling under my own weight, but I caught myself on the cold metal frame before I could fall. Below me, the city was a sprawling grid of golden light, shimmering through the rain that was still falling. I knew this city. I knew its cracked sidewalks, its broken streetlights, its smell of exhaust and desperation. But I had never seen it from here. I was 50 floors up, looking down on the streets where I had bled just hours ago. The cars were just red and white streaks. The people were invisible. This wasn't a hospital. It was a fortress in the sky. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the drug haze. This kind of luxury wasn't free. In my neighborhood, nobody gave you silk sheets and private doctors unless they owned you. I wasn't a guest, I was a loose end that had been scooped up and deposited in a gilded cage. "My sister," I whispered, the glass fogging under my breath as the realization hit me. If I wasn't home, Nia was alone. "I have to get to Nia." "Your sister is safe," a deep voice said from the doorway. I spun around, gripping the window frame for support. The door had opened silently. Standing in the shadows of the hall, still wearing the rain-soaked leather jacket, was the monster who had dismantled 3 men without blinking. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at me, and the weight of his gaze felt heavier than the viper's fists. "But you," he said, stepping into the light, "are not leaving." The door clicked shut behind him, the sound heavy and final, sealing the air-conditioned silence of the room. I pressed my back against the cold glass, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Up close, without the rain and the violence of the diner blurring him, Sun Junquan was even more terrifying. He was stillness personified, a predator who didn't need to posture to prove he was the most dangerous thing in the room. "I'm not staying," I said, though my voice lacked the steel I wanted. It trembled, betraying the pain radiating from my fractured cheekbone. I don't know you. I don't know your wars. I just want to go home to my sister. Junquan walked to the foot of the bed, his movements precise. He didn't look at me, he looked at his hands, scrubbing a fleck of dried blood, my blood, or the viper's, I couldn't tell, from his knuckles. You can't go home, he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding together. Because home isn't safe anymore. Not after what you did. I didn't do anything. I snapped, fear sparking into anger. I wiped tables. I served coffee. I hid a scared kid in a pantry because I'm not a monster. That's it. He looked up then, and the intensity in his eyes pinned me to the window. That scared kid, he said slowly, enunciating every word, was Minho. My younger brother. The air left my lungs. The boy I had shoved behind the flour sacks, the one with the terrified eyes and the bleeding side, wasn't just a random gang initiate. He was blood. The vipers weren't looking for a snitch, Busi, Junquan continued, stepping closer. The leather of his jacket creaked. They were hunting the only family I have left. They wanted to take him to break me. If they had found him that night, they would have sent him back to me in pieces. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, the magnitude of his words settling over me like a shroud. I hadn't just interrupted a drug deal or a turf war. I had interfered in a vendetta between titans. You saved the heir to everything I built, he said. He stopped 3 feet from me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. In my world, silence is expensive, but loyalty. Loyalty is a currency you cannot print. He knelt, mirroring the position he'd taken in the alley, bringing his face level with mine. The harsh overhead lights caught the faint, jagged scar running down his neck. You took a beating to protect a boy you didn't know, he said quietly. You bled to keep my brother whole. That is not a favor. That is a life debt. I don't want your debt, I whispered, hugging my knees to my chest. I don't want your money. I just want out. There is no out, Junquan said, and for the first time, I heard a trace of regret in his voice. You are part of the story now. The vipers know your face. They know you matter to me because you saved Minho. If you walk out that door, you won't make it to the street corner. He reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder before dropping to his side, a restrained gesture that terrified me more than a fist. You are not a prisoner, Busi. You are a target. And until every man who touched you is buried, you belong to me. He stood up and walked to a heavy mahogany desk near the glass wall, the leather of his jacket groaning softly with the movement. He keyed a code into a hidden panel, and a drawer hissed open. When he turned back, he was holding a black attaché case. He set it on the bedspread next to my bruised legs. The latches clicked open with a sound like a gun cocking. Inside, stacks of $100 bills were arranged in neat, thick bricks. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to pay off the debts, enough to buy a house in a zip code where sirens didn't wail all night, enough to fix Nia's teeth and buy her a future. 200,000, Junquan said, his voice devoid of emotion. Take it. Pack your sister. Leave the city tonight. Go west. Don't stop until you see the ocean. I stared at the money, and my stomach turned over. It didn't look like freedom. It looked like a bribe. It looked like evidence. I can't take this, I whispered, pulling my legs away from the case as if it radiated heat. It's not a negotiation, he said, pushing the case closer. The vipers will burn down your apartment looking for you. This buys you a head start. It buys my silence, I countered, my voice rising. It buys my complicity. If I take this, I'm not just a witness anymore. I'm on your payroll. I'm an accessory. You are alive, he snapped, his patience fraying. In my world, morality is a luxury you cannot afford right now. This is survival, Boosie. I don't want your world. I shouted, the sudden exertion sending a spike of agony through my fractured cheekbone. I survive just fine on my own. I work for my money. I don't take blood money. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, ignoring the doctor's earlier warnings. The floor felt miles away. I stood up, driven by a desperate need to distance myself from him, from the money, from the suffocating reality of who he was. I'm getting my sister, I gasped, taking a step toward the door. And I'm leaving. My body betrayed me instantly. The room didn't just spin, it capsized. The concussion scrambled my equilibrium, and the floor rushed up to meet me. My knees buckled, useless as water. I didn't hit the ground. For the second time that night, he was there. His arm hooked around my waist, hauling me up before I could collapse. The impact of his body against mine knocked the wind out of me. My hands instinctively grabbed his jacket for purchase, bunching the wet leather in my fists. We froze. He was holding me tight against him, my face pressed into the crook of his neck. I could feel the heat of his skin through the damp collar of his shirt, the steady, slow thud of his heart against my own racing chest. He smelled of rain and violence, but his grip was terrifyingly gentle. He didn't let go. He looked down, his face inches from mine, his dark eyes searching the wreckage of my face. The anger in the room evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy tension that made it hard to breathe. You can't even stand, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. How are you going to run? I looked up at him, trapped in the circle of his arms, and realized with a sinking dread that the money wasn't the trap. He was. He didn't carry me this time. He supported me, his arm a steel band around my waist, guiding me down a hallway that felt more like a bunker than a home. The air here was colder, recycled and humming with the low vibration of servers. He stopped at a heavy steel door, scanned his palm, and ushered me inside. The room was bathed in the sterile blue glow of a wall covered in monitors. Feeds from street corners, dockyards, and building lobbies flickered in silence. But Junquan pointed to the center screen, a live feed from a harsh, fluorescent-lit room with cinder-block walls. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. It was them. The Vipers. The three men who had cornered me in the diner. They looked small now. Stripped of their expensive coats, they were handcuffed to metal tables in 3 separate interrogation rooms. They weren't dead. They weren't even bleeding. They were terrified. You didn't kill them, I whispered, confusion warring with a dark, primal relief. I told you, Junquan said, his voice flat. What I do is deliberate. Death is too quick. It's a release. He tapped a key on the console, and audio crackled into the room. One of the men, the leader, was sobbing, begging a detective to believe him. They aren't just being arrested, Boosie, Junquan explained, watching the screen with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. An hour ago, police received an anonymous tip leading them to the trunk of that man's car. Inside, they found the weapon used to kill a federal judge 3 days ago. A weapon wiped clean of prints, except for theirs. My eyes widened. You framed them. I provided the justice system with a narrative they could not resist, he corrected. They are looking at life without parole. But that is not the punishment. He turned to look at me, the blue light of the screens reflecting in his dark eyes. They are going to Red River Penitentiary. I own the warden. I pay the guards. I control the commissary. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled my blood. Every meal they eat, every night they sleep, every hour they spend in the yard, will be at my discretion. They will live the rest of their lives in a cage where I hold the key, knowing exactly why they are there. I looked back at the screen. The leader was shaking, snot running down his face, realizing that his syndicate couldn't save him from a cop killer charge. It was a fate worse than the bullet I had expected. It was total, systematic erasure. Why? I asked, looking at Junquan. Why go to this trouble? Why not just? Because they touched you, he said simply. And I wanted them to have a long time to regret it. A shiver ran through me, not from the cold, but from the sudden, terrifying understanding of the man standing beside me. He hadn't just saved me. He had weaponized the entire justice system to avenge me. But you missed one thing, he said, his gaze shifting back to the monitors, his jaw tightening. The phone call the leader made before the police arrived. On the screen, the detective slammed a file down. The audio crackled again. It doesn't matter, the viper screamed at the cop. The order is already out. The girl is dead anyway. The sister is dead. My heart stopped. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. What did he say? I whispered, grabbing Junquan's arm. What order? Junquan pulled the phone from his pocket, the screen flashing with a perimeter alert. They aren't coming for you, Boosie. They know they can't breach this fortress. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. They're going for the leverage. Show me, I choked out, my fingers digging into the wet leather of his jacket. Junquan didn't argue. He typed a command with blurring speed, and the wall of screens shifted. The sterile interrogation rooms vanished, replaced by a grainy, rain-slick live feed from a traffic camera outside Lincoln High. It was 3:15. The bell had just rung. Hundreds of teenagers were pouring down the front steps, a sea of umbrellas and bright backpacks. My eyes scanned the crowd frantically, heart slamming against my bruised ribs, until I found her. Nia. She was standing near the curb, her bright yellow backpack a beacon in the gray afternoon, laughing at something a friend said. She looked so small. So devastatingly normal. There, Junquan said, his voice tight. He pointed to the bottom corner of the screen. A black sedan was idling in the bus lane, hazard lights flashing. It didn't belong. The windows were tinted too dark, the engine venting white exhaust into the cold air. As we watched, the rear door opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a school uniform or a parent's anxious expression. He was wearing a hooded raincoat, his hand tucked deep into his pocket, moving through the crowd with a predator's focus. He was walking straight toward Nia. Get your men there, I screamed, grabbing Junquan's arm. Call the police. Do something. My nearest extraction team is stuck on the bridge, Junquan said, the calculation in his eyes warring with a rare, raw panic. They are 4 minutes out. He will reach her in 30 seconds. She's 14, I sobbed, watching the man close the distance. He was 20 feet away. 10. Nia hadn't seen him. She was looking at her phone. You said you could protect us. I can, Junquan said, turning to me. He picked up a secure radio from the console. His hand hovered over the transmit button. I have a shadow asset on the roof across the street. A sniper. He has the shot. I froze. A sniper. At a high school. But it is a public zone, Junkwon continued, his dark eyes locking onto mine, demanding I understand the weight of this. If he takes the shot, there will be chaos. There will be trauma. Your sister will see a man die in front of her. I cannot make that choice for you, Boosie. Once this door opens, it never closes. On the screen, the man reached out. He grabbed Nia's wrist. She jerked back, her face twisting in confusion, then fear. He pulled her toward the car. The passive waitress who wiped tables and kept her head down died in that moment. The woman who counted tips and begged landlords for mercy vanished. I looked at the man putting his hands on the only thing I loved, and I felt a cold, hard steel settle in my spine. I looked at Junkwon. I didn't tremble. Take the shot. Target neutralized. The voice on the radio was clinical, stripping the moment of its horror. On the screen, the man in the raincoat crumpled to the pavement, a dark halo expanding around his head. The crowd screamed, a silent wave of panic on the monitor, but Nia was safe. A tactical team, Junkwon's men, was already swarming her, shielding her from the sight of the body, pulling her into a waiting armored SUV. I didn't vomit. I didn't cry. I stared at the man I had killed, and felt a terrified, icy calm settle into my marrow. Hours later, the rain had finally stopped. The balcony of the penthouse was cold, the city below a glittering grid of indifference. I stood at the railing, the wind biting through the silk robe Junkwon had given me. The glass door slid open. Junkwon stepped out, the black briefcase in his hand. He set it on the outdoor table between us. The car is waiting downstairs, he said, his voice rough with fatigue. Nia is at a safe house in Vermont. You can meet her there by morning. The money in this case will disappear you both. New names. New history. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the horizon, his jaw set hard. He expected me to run. He expected me to look at him with the same fear the vipers had shown. I had just ordered a man's death, surely, I would want to flee the monster who made it possible. I looked at the briefcase. It was heavy with freedom. It was the exit door I had prayed for every night while counting tips. Then I looked at my hands. They weren't the hands of a waitress anymore. They were the hands of a woman who had drawn a line in the sand and defended it with blood. If I leave, I asked, my voice steady, will they stop hunting us? I will kill them all, Junkwon said. But there will always be others. The world is full of wolves, Boosie. Exactly, I whispered. I didn't reach for the handle of the briefcase. I reached past it. My fingers brushed the back of his hand, resting on the cold railing. He flinched, his muscles coiling tight, as if he expected a blow. He turned to me, his dark eyes wide with shock, searching my face for judgment. He found none. I don't want to be a sheep among wolves anymore, I said. I want to be the one holding the leash. I laced my fingers through his. His hand was rough, scarred, and warm. Slowly, tentatively, he gripped me back, holding on as if I were the anchor keeping him from drifting into the dark. We turned to face the glass wall of the penthouse. In the reflection, the bruised waitress and the lonely king were gone. There was only us. Two broken timelines, finally merged into something unbreakable. Some choices change us forever. If you love this story, subscribe for more videos like this. I'll see you in the next video.